Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is another episode on the series of how to place a 3D spaceship on your street. And now we're going to do camera tracking. So we're going to extrapolate the camera motion that we had on the day to our digital camera. The first thing that you need to understand about that is that it is a trial and error process. And I say that because I am definitely going to screw up at least sometime during the recording of this tutorial. Here we are in Blender 2.9. And I'm going to open up a new workspace over here. Right over here. I have all these workspaces, layout, modeling, sculpting, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to open up a new one on VFX motion tracking. All right? And this is the workspace we're going to work at. You've briefly seen this in my last video. I've explained a couple of things to you. But I'm going to come over to this open button and load in my footage. So I'm going to load the sharpened version. I can just come over here where I have my frames, select A and go for open clip. When I hit A, it selects all of the elements in the folder and I click on open clip. So set scene frames prefetch, you already know that. And it's prefetching, as you can see. It's just ramming this into my RAM. Ramming into my RAMs, that makes sense. What I'm gonna do is here I have my timeline, alright? So scroll zooms and middle mouse button pans around. I have my video here in this window. So instead of manually, I could just come over here like I showed in the last tutorial and just manually choose a bunch of trackers like this, and track them all around, but I'm gonna let Blender do that for me. Alright, so I'm gonna hit on detect features, and Blender's going to detect a bunch of features. I'm actually going to lower this distance. I'm going to set it to like something like 80 and this margin to be something like 8, and that's going to give me a bunch of trackers, and most of them are going to be garbage, but this is normal and we can clean them up in a future process. So here I can either come onto this button right here, track markers, or I can hit Control T. Alright, you can see a couple of trackers are just going wild, but you just let them have their fun. And we're gonna get rid of them eventually. Okay, we just go from the beginning all the way to the end of the footage, and once that's done, we come back. Alright, so when you get here to the end, you'll see that these red things are the trackers that got lost, and you see as you go forwards, more and more trackers lose their track mark. I find them a bit annoying, so I'm just going to come over here to clip display and turn off show disabled, so it's just going to show the trackers that are working. I am going to hit A to select all trackers and Control L. I want you to pay attention to this padlock right over here, okay? Control L locks the tracker, so now I can select it, but I can't, if I hit G, I can't move it around. If I just find this tracker right here, for instance, and I disable it, now I can move it around. But if I lock it, now I can't. And I'm going to select all the trackers again, and I'm just going to press H, and I selected only the trackers that are on the screen. I'm just going to go ahead and hide all the trackers. I have a couple here. They didn't even make one frame. We're going to get rid of them later. I'm just going to come to the last frame, and I'm going to do the same. Detect features, and this time, Control-Shift-T. So now I'm gonna get the trackers from the beginning till the end and from the end till the beginning. We need at least 8 good trackers. We need a good amount of trackers throughout all of our scene. So this is good. I'm just gonna lock them, and Alt-H is gonna bring back all the trackers that I have. And as you can clearly see on this graph right here, I'm gonna hit Control Spacebar to zoom in the graph and just kind of dial this in a bit. And what this graph here shows you is the movement of one specific track in X and Y. Always red represents X and green represents Y. But for example, this tracker right over here, I'm going to press Shift H and isolate this tracker. I'm going to come over here and press L just to lock our view in, and you can see that as our tracker moves in the x-axis, we have the correspondent movement over here on the graph, and the same for the y-axis. All right, so if I actually unlock this and move this about, you'll see that now I'm moving it on the x-axis and the red line is moving, and now I'm moving it on the y-axis and the green line is moving. Obviously, most trackers should follow sort of specific pattern. You see these, the majority of them do. They follow. You have some differences here, of course, because some are in the front, some are in the back. But I mean, look at this guy. If I click on the line here, it selects the tracker over here. So just look at this guy. It's just going all over the place. That means that this tracker isn't a very reliable source of information for how the shot's moving. So I can just come over here and delete it. And of course I can come over manually and delete a couple of the curves that are way off. But this is time consuming and it's a bit error prone because sometimes things do move differently because you have a parallax, because you have a difference in the way that things move in the foreground and in the background. So the best way to do that, right here on the Solve tab, I come over to Cleanup and I choose Filter Tracks. I'm going to give it a threshold. The larger this threshold is, the more tolerant it's going to be. So with 5 by standard, it identified 310 problematic tracks. But we only have, if we look here at our dope sheet, we only have 354, so that's way too many tracks. So I'm going to need it to be a little bit more lenient. Let's go to 20. It identified 57 problematic tracks. Let me see 30. 20 it is. Just going to go ahead and delete these tracks. And as you can see, that has massively improved the look of my graph. I still got some guys going over here, so I'm just going to lower this to 15. Be careful with you don't want to lower too much, okay? Because you need the information. And then you just come back to the graph, and it's looking kind of okay with the exception of a couple of curves that are kind of weird. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete them by hand. And the cool thing is, once you delete the one curve that's problematic, that curve tends to be problematic in more than one place. Now, if you see here, like this curve comes out of the 0 spot in a random place. This is normal. This just means that the curve started in that or ended at that point. That's nothing to worry about. Like these guys here, they're okay. That's fine. This isn't. This, let me see. You can just hit L and lock to them. Oh, these are dangerous tracks, but this one worked. In general, you want to avoid trackers where a foreground edge intersects a background object. Like here, for instance, you have the floor in the background and you have these spikes in the foreground. And the edge of the spike intersects the ground, but it doesn't move according to the camera move. So it can lead to problematic tracks, but I don't have any of those. And the track seems to be working quite well. The trackers are following their points and I don't see any big problems. So what I'm gonna do over here is on Solve, I need to choose a couple settings. First of all, the more information you have about your camera, the best. So right off the bat, if you know, like I do, what camera you used, you can just Google and figure out which sensor your camera has. And my camera has a Canon APS-C sensor, so I'm gonna set that in. When I did this the last time, I had to manually type in the focal length. For a first try, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to see how well Blender deals. I'm going to have Blender choose the keyframes, and the keyframes are very important. It's automatically set to 1 and 30, but in this case, that wouldn't be very good. The keyframes are the frames that Blender is going to use to extrapolate the camera motion. They need to have at least 8 common trackers between them, and they need to have a very different perspective. So like from here to here, that's how far as our perspective change goes, and these would be ideal keyframes. But I'm going to let Blender choose that for me, and I'm gonna have Blender refine focal length K1, K2. I'm not gonna worry about anything else. K1 and K2, in case you don't know, is the way that you measure lens distortion. So I'm just gonna save this real quick. I'm gonna call this track 1, because I'm probably gonna do more than once. I'm just gonna hit the big dumb solve camera motion button. When you have keyframes selected here, it usually takes a while, so I'm just gonna pause screen recording and come back once it's done, alright? Go. Whoa, all right, it's solved, and the solve error is 109.11. So we should try to keep the solve error under 1, so that's not working. I'm gonna take a look at the lens, and it's set to 15, and I know for a fact I use a 35 mil, so I'm gonna put that in and just have Blender using the same keyframes. It chose 93 and 106. Not too much perspective change over here. That could be a problem, so I'm gonna have it choose again. I'm gonna have it refine just the lens distortion, and I'm gonna see if it's any better. And that seems to have solved it. We have now a solve error of 0.53. And it chose keyframes 87 and 110 this time. Yeah, I see. It's a bit more perspective change here. And that did it. Again, this is something that every time you do it, it changes a little bit. Don't be afraid, don't be discouraged if it doesn't work the first time. If it works the first time, that's the exception, not the other way around. Now what I'm gonna do, now, is I have these two buttons that set up the scene for me. Set as background, so I have now this image set as the background of my camera, and set up tracking scene. Now what Blender did over here is it has my camera with my 35mm lens, and the camera is following this path, as you can see. And this is my scene. These are the points, and if you select a tracker, you see that it corresponds to a point, and immediately you see a problem. Like these guys, these three guys here, for instance, should be on the ground, but they are all the way over here. Easiest way to do that, you select them and you hit floor, and they're on the ground now. There we go. That wasn't too hard. Now it's the time. I like just select this cube and just hit GZ1 just to put it onto the floor, and I just hit play, and I'll see if my track sticks. I always get self-conscious about that, and I always think it's garbage. The trick is, you see these spots on the floor. You just look to see if the edges of your objects are moving away from them. You have a slight move over here. No, that's just a perspective change. It's fine. This track seems to be working pretty well. I'm just gonna hide this and see if this cube looks like it's on the ground. And it's working. It's working. So now what I gotta do, I'm just gonna come over to the layout tab, and I have my camera, but the track marks are gone. Fear not. You turn on motion tracking in the viewports overlays right here. You just turn on motion tracking and you can see them. I like to have my viewport set as the camera view from here. And what I like to do is move here. I can change where I'm going to pivot the object. So I'm going to move the camera from the 3D cursor. And I'm just going to unhide this plane. And I'm going to rotate my camera around until this kind of lines up with my street. Some of the points are a bit off, but I don't care. That always happens. Not all the track isn't 100%, perfect. I just want to see if visually it's jumping, and I always feel very self-conscious when I'm doing this. And if you feel like it's jumping, you can always go back into... Oh, over here I have a little bit of a... See? That's a track error that I noticed. So what I'm going to do is just give the computer a little bit more detail, right? So I'm just going to choose a track point. Just track forwards and backwards. And sometimes that helps. So I'm not going to refine anything, because then it goes really fast. I'm not going to refine the keyframes. And I'm just going to hit solve camera motion. And it's fucked. Try different keyframes and solve camera motion again. It gave me a solve error of 25. And I didn't feel like spending the rest of my day tweaking that track. So I just came back and accepted. It slides ever so slightly over here. I'm gonna be annoyed by it. That's camera tracking for you. We have now sort of successfully extrapolated the movement of my camera on the day and stuck it to the footage and make it go the same way. Sometimes it's easy as hell. Sometimes for some reason it just refuses to cooperate. And yeah, that's it. Wait, who are you? I had this track over here, and it doesn't seem to be following anything in particular. Oh, it just jumps over here. See? So that was a good thing that I noticed. I'm gonna clean from here on. Alright, and I am just going to try to solve camera motion again and see if it gets... No, it just... If I just delete this track completely, let me see if it gets better. It kills it, but the fun thing is I can actually show you something else This blue line over here in the middle, this is the error. You can see that it just goes haywire around over here. So what I can try to do, I can try to give it some more points to work with. And I'm gonna do it by hand. I'm just gonna select a bunch more track marks that could help the computer figure out the perspective of this part of the shot specifically. You can scale them up if you want them to cover a larger area. It's just gonna take slightly longer. And the track forwards. Now I'm just gonna inspect them all individually. You good? Yeah, you good. You good. As you can see, the computer's just jumping all around over here, and it looks bad. You good? You good? Yeah. And I'm just gonna try to solve again. I made it worse. Just clean the tracks. Just try to clean the tracks by error. If the track has an error higher than 10, I'm just gonna go ahead and delete it. Try to solve again. And I'm just gonna try to choose another set of keyframes. Sometimes that helps. Alright, I've detected another problem. These two trackers here are following a reflection, and that is not accurate, so I'm just gonna get rid of them. And let's see what of a difference does that make. Not much. Well, we can keep on going like this. Oh, you're following a reflection also, aren't you? Yeah, bye. 0.52. That seems to have worked. Let me take a look. Just gonna come over here to motion tracking. Just gonna make sure that these tracks are on the ground. Some of them are. Let me see. Set these to floor. If your tracks don't line up properly to the ground, you're also gonna have problems. That seems to have done the trick. Sometimes when you're tracking reflections and you don't notice it, that can cause all sorts of problems in your track. You see me going back and forth. What I'm paying attention right now is on the distance between this part here and this edge. And it seems to be holding pretty well. And now we have our tracked scene. It is never a painless process, as you can see. I had to do a couple tests and a couple of things to figure out what was causing problems in my track. But this is normal, right? This is what happens when you're doing camera tracking. It's going back and forth and trying things and trying to figure out what could be the problem. Reflections, they of course are going to cause all sorts of problems in perspective. The camera settings, sometimes they don't work as well. And you just got to try things out, and sometimes you have to add tracks by hand, sometimes you have to delete tracks that aren't working. There isn't one surefire way to track a scene, and this is the general process you're gonna go by. This isn't an automatic process. You know, some softwares you can do that automatically, but if you're doing it with Blender, this is what you have to do. And that's all I have for you today, and I see you on my next video.